You might be thinking, if they know they treated me badly, why didn't they apologize? Why didn't they try to fix it? Why didn't they do better when they clearly understood they were hurting me? These questions are valid, and the answers reveal something crucial about avoidant psychology. The avoidance awareness of their poor treatment doesn't translate into corrective action, because acknowledging the poor treatment out loud would require vulnerability they can't access. Apologizing would mean admitting they were wrong, admitting they caused harm, admitting they care enough about you that hurting you matters to them. All of these admissions feel impossible, so the avoidant carries the awareness silently, suffering from the guilt and shame privately, while you're left believing they don't care because they never said anything to indicate otherwise. What you need to understand is that the avoidant's silence about their awareness doesn't mean the awareness isn't there. It means the awareness is trapped behind defenses so thick that it can't escape into words or corrective actions. The avoidant knows they messed up. They know they treated you poorly. They know you deserved better. But knowing and being able to do something about it are separated by a chasm of fear the avoidant can't cross. The knowing tortures them internally while their external behavior remains unchanged, creating a split between their internal experience and external presentation that's devastating for everyone involved. You're hurt by someone who appears to not care about hurting you. They're drowning in awareness that they hurt someone who mattered while being unable to express that awareness or make amends for the hurt they caused. The specific ways they know they messed up. The avoidant knows they treated you poorly in ways that are remarkably specific. They remember the time you were vulnerable with them, and they responded with coldness that shut you down. They can picture your face in that moment, the hurt that flashed across it before you composed yourself. They replay that moment obsessively, wishing they'd responded differently, knowing they damaged something between you through their inability to meet your vulnerability with presence. The memory haunts them because they understand they had an opportunity to deepen connection, and they chose protection instead, and that choice had consequences they now see clearly. They know they messed up every time they disappeared without explanation. They remember the plans they cancelled, the messages they ignored, the times they went silent and left you wondering what happened. The avoidant is aware that this behavior was cruel, that it created anxiety in you, that it made you feel unimportant and disposable. They know that if someone treated them that way, they'd be hurt. The awareness that they inflicted the exact kind of treatment they'd hate receiving creates specific shame that eats at them during quiet moments when their defenses are down. The avoidant knows they messed up by making you feel like you were too much. They remember telling you that you were too emotional, too needy, too demanding. They can recall the specific words they used to make you feel like your completely normal needs were excessive or burdensome. And somewhere in their awareness, they know this was manipulation, a way of making you the problem so they didn't have to address their own limitations. They know they gaslit you into questioning your own needs, rather than meeting those needs or being honest about their inability to meet them. This awareness creates guilt, because they understand they damaged your self-perception to protect their ego. They know they treated you poorly by keeping you in ambiguity. They remember you asking where the relationship was going and them deflecting, avoiding, refusing to define anything. They're aware this ambiguity served them perfectly, allowing them all the benefits of relationship without any of the accountability. But they also know it tortured you, kept you in limbo, prevented you from making informed decisions about your own life. The avoidant understands they chose their comfort over your clarity, and this choice was fundamentally selfish in ways they can acknowledge to themselves even if they never acknowledged it to you. They know they messed up by being inconsistent in ways that messed with your nervous system. Hot one week, cold the next. Available and warm on Tuesday, distant and unavailable by Friday. They're aware this inconsistency created an anxious attachment response in you even if you entered the relationship relatively secure. They understand they trained you to be hypervigilant, always monitoring their mood and availability, never feeling safe that yesterday's closeness predicted tomorrow's presence. The avoidant knows this was harmful, and they feel guilty about transforming you into an anxious version of yourself through their inability to show up consistently. The internal guilt they're carrying. The guilt the avoidant carries about how they treated you is comprehensive and constant. It's not fleeting guilt that appears occasionally and then disappears. It's persistent background noise in their psychological experience, a steady awareness that they harmed someone who didn't deserve harm, that they took someone's love and patience and returned it with coldness and inconsistency. The guilt shows up when they're alone, when they're trying to sleep, when they see something that reminds them of you, when they're in new relationships and find themselves repeating patterns while being aware they're repeating them. The guilt is particularly intense because the avoidant knows their behavior contradicted their feelings. They cared about you, maybe loved you, but treated you like you didn't matter. The disconnect between how they felt internally and how they behaved externally creates specific shame because it reveals them to themselves as someone who hurts people they love. The avoidant has to live with the knowledge that they're capable of treating someone precious to them in ways that are careless and cruel. This knowledge damages their self-concept in ways they can't repair without doing deep therapeutic work most of them avoid. The guilt also includes awareness of opportunities lost. The avoidant knows that the relationship could have been something beautiful if they'd been braver. They know you were offering them something rare, that you were patient and understanding and willing to work with their limitations. They know they had a chance at real partnership, and they destroyed it through their fear. The regret of wasted opportunity compounds the guilt, because it's regret about their own limitations, about who they couldn't be, rather than just about what they lost. They're guilty about hurting you, and they're guilty about depriving themselves of what they actually wanted because they were too scared to reach for it. The avoidance guilt is intensified by comparing their treatment of you to how they'd want to be treated. They're aware of the golden rule they violated. They know they treated you in ways they'd find unacceptable if they were on the receiving end. This creates cognitive dissonance between their values and their behavior. The avoidant often values honesty, respect, kindness, but their behavior toward you violated all of these values. Living with the awareness of this violation creates internal conflict that's painful, but not painful enough to motivate change, which creates additional guilt about knowing better, but not doing better. Why the awareness doesn't lead to apology or amends. Understanding that the avoidant knows they messed up raises an obvious question. If they know, why don't they apologize? Why don't they try to make amends? Why don't they at least acknowledge what they did? The answer reveals the core of avoidant psychology. Apologizing requires vulnerability the avoidant cannot access. To apologize means admitting fault, admitting harm, admitting that someone else's pain matters to you. All of these admissions make the avoidant feel exposed in ways their nervous system interprets as danger. So even though they know an apology is warranted, even though they feel guilty, they can't push through the vulnerability barrier that separates knowing from saying. The avoidant also doesn't apologize because apologizing would require them to sit with your pain while you respond. You might be angry, you might be hurt, you might want to talk about how their behavior affected you. All of these responses would require the avoidant to hold space for emotional intensity they're not equipped to handle. The avoidant knows that apologizing opens a door to emotional conversation they're terrified of having, so they choose silence, even knowing silence is its own form of harm, because silence is more comfortable than the vulnerability of genuine apology and accountability. Fear of rejection also prevents the avoidant from apologizing. They assume that if they acknowledge how badly they treated you, you'll confirm that yes, they're terrible, and no, there's no path forward. The avoidant's self-esteem is often more fragile than their defended exterior suggests. They're terrified of having their worst fears about themselves confirmed through your response to their apology. So they don't apologize because not apologizing allows them to avoid the rejection they're certain an apology would invite. It's self-protection through avoidance of accountability, even though the avoidance guarantees the outcome they fear, you moving on without them. The avoidant also doesn't make amends, because making amends would require sustained changed behavior, and sustained change feels impossible. The avoidant knows that apologizing without changing is meaningless, but they also know they're not ready or able to change. They're not in therapy, they're not doing work on their patterns, they're not developing capacity for the vulnerability and consistency you need. So they reason that attempting amends without ability to follow through with change would be cruel, giving you false hope. In their mind, staying silent is kinder than apologizing and then inevitably disappointing you again. This reasoning is flawed. but it's how they justify their inaction despite their awareness. The specific moments when their awareness peaks. The avoidant's awareness of how they messed up isn't constant at the same intensity. It peaks during specific moments when their defenses are down and reality breaks through. The first peak is when they're alone at night. Darkness and silence remove distractions and the avoidant is left with their thoughts. This is when the replay of their poor treatment of you becomes unavoidable. They lie awake reviewing every mistake, every moment of coldness, every time they chose fear over connection. The nighttime awareness is particularly painful because there's nothing to defend against it, no activity to distract from it, just them and their regret in the dark. Awareness peaks when they see you've moved on. Maybe they see through mutual friends that you're doing well without them. Maybe they encounter evidence you're dating someone else. Maybe they accidentally see your social media and you look happy. Genuinely happy in ways you didn't look toward the end with them. This visual evidence that you're thriving without them forces recognition that they were the problem. They can't maintain comfortable narratives about incompatibility or bad timing when you're clearly flourishing now that they're not in your life. The contrast between your struggle when with them and your thriving without them makes their role in your previous suffering undeniable. The avoidance awareness peaks when they try to date someone new and realize they're repeating patterns. They find themselves being cold with someone who's warm. They notice themselves withdrawing when someone gets close. They observe themselves making excuses to avoid intimacy. And in observing these patterns with someone new, they're forced to recognize these patterns were the problem with you too. The repetition across relationships proves the issue is them, not you, not circumstances, not incompatibility. This recognition that they're the common denominator in their relationship failures brings sharp awareness of how they messed up with you specifically. Awareness peaks during moments of genuine loneliness when the avoidant recognizes they pushed away someone who actually cared about them. The avoidant experiences loneliness differently than most people. Their loneliness isn't about being physically alone. It's about the specific absence of someone who saw them, understood them, cared about them despite their defenses. When they feel that specific loneliness for you, when they miss the exact way you made them feel safe, the awareness that they destroyed that safety through their own behavior is crushing. They know they had something precious and they threw it away. And knowing this while sitting in the loneliness their choices created is its own punishment, the shame that prevents them from reaching out. Even when the avoidant knows they messed up, even when they carry guilt and awareness and regret, they often don't reach out to you. The primary barrier is shame. The avoidant is profoundly ashamed of how they treated you, and shame makes people hide rather than repair. The avoidant feels so bad about their behavior that they can't imagine you'd want to hear from them. They assume you hate them, that you've written them off completely, that any attempt to reach out would be unwelcome or would reopen wounds you've worked hard to heal. The shame tells them they don't deserve forgiveness, so they don't ask for it. The shame is also about the avoidant seeing themselves clearly for the first time and being disgusted by what they see. They recognize they were the villain in your story. They were the person who hurt you, who wasted your time, who took your love and gave back coldness. Seeing themselves as the bad guy contradicts the identity they've maintained, and the cognitive dissonance creates shame so intense they can barely function. Reaching out to you would mean facing you while carrying this shame, and facing you feels unbearable when they're this disgusted with themselves. The avoidant also experiences anticipatory shame about how they imagine the conversation would go if they reached out. They picture you being rightfully angry. They imagine you telling them exactly how much they hurt you. They envision you rejecting their apology, or worse, accepting it, but making clear you're not interested in giving them another chance. All of these imagined scenarios create shame about the conversation before it even happens, and the anticipatory shame prevents them from ever initiating contact. They're so afraid of the shame they'd feel during the conversation that they choose the ongoing shame of not reaching out over the acute shame of reaching out and being rejected. Shame also prevents the avoidant from reaching out because reaching out would require admitting they were wrong, and admitting wrongness feels like complete ego annihilation. The avoidant has often maintained their self-esteem through believing they were right, that their boundaries were healthy, that you were too needy or too demanding. But awareness of how they actually treated you destroys these protective narratives. They know they were wrong. They know their boundaries were actually walls. They know you weren't too needy, they were too unavailable. Admitting this out loud to you would require destroying the false narratives they've been hiding behind, and that destruction feels like psychological death, what they wish they could say but can't. The avoidant has entire speeches composed in their head, things they wish they could say to you but can't push past their fear to actually communicate. They wish they could tell you they're sorry, that they know they hurt you, that you deserve so much better than what they gave you. They wish they could explain that their coldness wasn't about you not being enough. It was about them being terrified of how much you were becoming to them. They wish they could articulate that every time they pulled away, they were running from their own feelings, not from you. They wish they could tell you that you were right about everything. Right that they were emotionally unavailable. Right that they had intimacy issues. Right that their behavior was hurting you. The avoidant spent so much time making you feel like you were overreacting or asking for too much, and now they wish they could admit you were accurately identifying problems they were denying. They wish they could validate your perception, acknowledge that what you experienced was real, tell you that you weren't crazy for feeling hurt by behavior that was genuinely hurtful. The avoidant wishes they could thank you. Thank you for your patience with their fear. Thank you for trying to understand their patterns. Thank you for seeing good in them when they couldn't see it in themselves. Thank you for staying as long as you did, for giving them chances they didn't deserve, for loving them despite their inability to receive that love properly. They're aware of how much you gave and how little they returned, and they wish they could express gratitude for what you offered, even though they couldn't accept it. They wish they could tell you they think about you, that you weren't forgettable, that you mattered in ways they couldn't admit while you were present. The avoidant wants you to know you weren't just another person passing through their life. You were significant. You were important. You were someone who could have been their person if they'd been brave enough. They wish they could tell you that you're the standard they'll measure everyone else against, that you showed them what they actually want even though they couldn't accept it from you. Most of all, they wish they could tell you that losing you taught them things they couldn't learn any other way, that your absence has forced self-examination they were avoiding when you were present, that they finally understand the cost of their patterns in ways they didn't understand before. They wish they could tell you that you changed them, that even though the change came too late for you to benefit from it, the change exists because you were in their life. But saying any of this requires vulnerability the avoidant still can't access, so all these wishes stay locked inside while you're left believing they never cared at all. The difference between knowing and changing. The crucial thing to understand is that the avoidant knowing they messed up doesn't mean they're changing or will change. Awareness and transformation are completely different things. The avoidant can carry full awareness of their poor treatment of you while continuing to treat the next person the same way. They can know intellectually that their patterns are harmful while being emotionally unable to do the work required to change those patterns. Knowing is passive, changing is active, and most avoidants stay stuck in knowing without ever moving into changing. The avoidant knows they need therapy, but they don't go to therapy consistently. They know they have attachment wounds, but they don't do the deep work to heal those wounds. They know they need to practice vulnerability, but they continue choosing comfort over growth. The knowing becomes another thing to feel guilty about. They're aware they should be doing work to change and they're not doing it, which adds guilt about their inaction to the existing guilt about their poor treatment of you. But the additional guilt still doesn't create enough motivation to actually pursue transformation. What prevents the avoidant from moving from knowing to changing is that change requires sustained discomfort, and the avoidant's entire psychology is organized around avoiding discomfort. Changing attachment patterns means feeling all the feelings they've been avoiding for decades. It means sitting with vulnerability that feels like dying. It means tolerating anxiety about intimacy instead of running from it. The discomfort required for change is so intense and prolonged that most avoidants choose to live with the guilt of knowing they should change over the pain of actually changing. The avoidant often has what appears to be moments of change that are actually just temporary adjustments prompted by fear of loss. They lost you and they don't want to lose the next person the same way, so they try harder initially. They communicate more, they're more available, they manage their fear better in the early stages. But this isn't sustainable change. It's controlled behavior that's exhausting to maintain. Eventually, as they feel more secure that the new person isn't going anywhere, the real patterns resurface. The knowing didn't create real change, it just created temporary behavior modification that collapses under the weight of unhealed attachment wounds. What you're supposed to do with this information. Knowing that the avoidant knows they treated you badly might bring you some satisfaction. It confirms that you weren't crazy, that their behavior was objectively poor, that they're aware of what they did even if they never acknowledged it. But this information shouldn't change your decisions about whether to stay available to them or move on completely. The avoidance awareness doesn't obligate you to give them another chance. Their guilt doesn't require you to offer forgiveness. Their knowledge that they messed up doesn't mean they've become capable of treating you better. If the avoidant reaches out with genuine apology and evidence of sustained work on themselves, then you have information to make decisions with. But their internal awareness without external action doesn't create relationship viability. You can't build partnership with someone's hidden guilt and silent regret. You can only build partnership with someone's present behavior, their demonstrated growth, their consistent ability to show up. The avoidant knowing they messed up is the absolute minimum. It's not impressive. It's not enough. It's just the starting point of where they need to be to even begin deserving another chance with you. Use this information to protect yourself from making their internal experience your responsibility. The avoidant might be suffering with guilt and awareness, but that's not your burden to relieve. You're not responsible for making them feel better about how they treated you. You're not obligated to offer forgiveness to ease their shame. You're not required to give them opportunities to prove they've changed. Their internal experience of guilt is for them to manage, ideally with a therapist, not with you as their confessor and forgiver. Understanding they know they messed up should also prevent you from romanticizing their regret. The avoidant feeling bad about losing you isn't the same as the avoidant being capable of not losing you in the first place. Regret after the fact isn't the same as doing better in real time. Missing you now isn't the same as showing up for you then. Don't let knowledge of their awareness make you available for a reunion where they repeat the same patterns while being more aware they're repeating them. Awareness without change is just consciousness of harm while continuing to cause harm. The truth about their awareness: it tortures them, but it doesn't absolve them. The avoidant knows they messed up. They're carrying awareness that's heavy and constant. They're living with guilt that surfaces in quiet moments and prevents peace. They're experiencing shame that makes them hide rather than repair. They're regretting decisions that cost them something precious. All of this is real. All of this is painful for them, but none of it absolves them of responsibility for their behavior. None of it entitles them to your forgiveness. None of it obligates you to make yourself available for another round of the same treatment. The awareness tortures them, and that torture is the consequence of their actions. Consequences are important. The avoidant needed to experience real cost for their patterns, and losing you is that cost. The guilt and awareness they're carrying is appropriate response to their behavior. Don't feel sorry for them carrying this weight. They created the weight through their choices. The weight might eventually motivate them to do the work required to be different with the next person, or it might just be weight they carry while repeating patterns. Either way, it's their weight to carry, not yours to lift. What the avoidant knows is that they had something real with you, and they destroyed it through their fear. They know you deserve better than what they gave you. They know they treated you poorly despite your patience and understanding. They know they've lost someone they'll compare everyone else to and find everyone else lacking. They know all of this with perfect clarity, and the knowing changes nothing about what happened. It only shapes how they remember what happened and how they live with what they did. The awareness is their burden now, the price they pay for being too afraid to do better when it mattered. And you're free, genuinely free, regardless of whether their awareness ever transforms into the growth they'd need to deserve someone like you again.